What's up YouTube, and welcome back to the channel. So recently my buddy Jake added an air regulator to his WaterPORT. Now what that does is it allows him to hook up the air compressor that he has on his Jeep directly to the WaterPORT, meaning that he doesn't have to use that silly pump to get pressure in there anymore. Since I have onboard air in the Land Cruiser as well, I thought it'd be a great mod to have. Not only is it very useful, but it's also very cheap, and he told me it only took him 10 minutes to complete. So why don't you guys sit back, relax, and join me in my search for continuously flowing water. Before we get started, let's take a look at the parts that I've gathered. So first of all, we have the 1/4 inch mini air regulator with gauge. This guy basically regulates how much air goes into the WaterPORT. Next up, of course, we have the hose itself. Now this is just like some plastic tubing that you can get from Home Depot or Lowe's or something like that. Then we have the little connectors, the push-on connectors for that hose. We've got one straight and 190. After that, we have this little check valve. Now what this does is it keeps the water from going from the WaterPORT into the air compressor. There's a little ball in there, and so it only goes one way. That way we know that the compressor is safe. Lastly, we have the quick connectors. Now these guys basically is used to hook up the air hose to the bottom of the regulator. This one I got really fancy with. I got the little swivel kind, but you can use a regular straight from like Harbor Freight or something like that. That's not a problem. And of course, I've got my WaterPORT, which is the one that I've been using. All the tools and the parts that I use in this video will be listed in the description down below, so make sure you go ahead and check that out. Now, on with the modification. So this is the side of the WaterPORT that we're gonna install the regulator onto. As you can see, it has the little tire valve, the air pressure valve thing right here. Let's take a look at this actually. Yeah, it looks like it's just for like a regular, like, you know, tire inflator and stuff like that. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna mount the regulator on this side, and we're gonna have the hose run into here. So first, let's take off this guy. So looking at the valve that came with the WaterPORT, it looks like it just screwed onto the body of the WaterPORT. So the threads are in the plastic itself. When you screw in the push-on valve, make sure you don't over tighten it, as you could probably, I imagine, strip out the threads really easy because they're just plastic. And what I would recommend is a little bit of RTV on the threads. That way you know it will be airtight. So let me give that a shot. So the push to connect air fitting, I put a little bit of RTV on, as you guys can see. You don't need to go overboard on that, just a little bit will do, just so that it is airtight. And literally, I tightened it with my hand. You do not need to use a ratchet, an air gun, a wrench, anything like that. I think with hand tight and the RTV, you will be fine. You don't want to risk stripping the body of the WaterPORT, and because then the WaterPORT will be useless. So anyways, next step is to fit the regulator on here. So these guys will have to come out. The air regulator will have to go on the WaterPORT like this. This is the bracket. Actually, let's take this guy off. This is going to be the bracket that goes into the regulator and screws on like so. Watch, I cross thread this. There we go. So it goes on like this. The bracket has 2 slotted holes, so we're going to mount it right about there. The holes, the slots actually aren't quite big enough for the bolts, like barely, so I might have to use a Dremel to widen these up a little bit, but that's where they should go. So let's get this guy mounted up properly. With a little bit of Dremel work, the bolts now fit into the bracket fairly easily. So let's get this guy bolted up to the water port. Perfect. Now for the main event. But before I put the regulator onto the water port mount, what I'm going to do is install the gauge, install the fittings, so that way I have easier access when I'm trying to tighten everything down. So this guy is going to go on the mount like so. So you're going to have the top port, the middle port, and the bottom port. On the back, obviously, it's capped off. So let's go through this logically. The top port, we are going to have the 90-degree fitting on there. The middle port, we are going to have the gauge on there. And on the bottom, we are going to have the check valve. And then we're going to have the quick disconnect for the air hose. For the fittings, you don't need RTV. All you need is a little bit of Teflon tape. If you got the fittings that I put in the description down below, they already have a little bit on there. But if you didn't, make sure you have some Teflon tape on deck. The RTV was only because it was screwed into the plastic body, so who knows. But because this is metal on metal, it should be fine, airtight with just a little bit of Teflon. So let's put it on. And this is the completed regulator. So on the top we have the 90-degree, and this one's actually really nice. It still swivels even when it's tight onto the regulator. We've got the gauge in the center, so we'll see how much pressure we're running in the water port. And on the bottom we have the check valve that's connected to the quick disconnect for the air hose. So one word of caution now on these guys, you don't really need to tighten them down that much. I mean, as long as you're snug, you should be okay, because they do have the Teflon tape on there. And it's always better, if you leave it a little bit loose and you need to tighten a little bit later, you still can. But if you over tighten and strip everything, there's really no going back. So anyhow, next let's put the regulator onto the water port. And there we have it. We have the air regulator securely mounted onto the water port with all its fittings. Now, everything was pretty straightforward except for this plastic nut that mounts the regulator to the mount itself. It's some gigantic size which I don't have. I had to use my AN wrench to get this guy tight. Again, it doesn't need to be super duper tight. It's a plastic nut on some plastic threads, so just be careful. But you probably need a pretty big wrench or a clamp to get it just a little bit snug. Next up, we got to connect the regulator to the water port via the hose. So we don't even need that much hose. Literally, it is like, I don't know, 3 inches or something like that, maybe a little bit more. But we only need it from the push-on port. Actually, let's just push it on right here. There we go. And we need it to the 90-degree bend right here. So I will probably cut it somewhere right there. Something like this. Ta-da! Now we have the regulator hooked up to the water port. Now, before I put water in here and compressed air in here, we want to give the RTV a little bit of a chance to completely cure. So I'm going to let this guy sit for 24 hours, let it completely cure, and then we'll fill it up with water and check for air leaks. What's up, guys? So it's been well over 24 hours. The RTV should have plenty of time to cure. Let's fill it up with water and test it out. If I remember correctly, this guy is the safety check valve on the back of the water port, and it's rated at roughly about 40 psi. So what happens is if the pressure inside the water port becomes greater than 40 psi, the excess pressure should be leaked out from here. With that being said, the ARB compressor is capable of 100 plus psi, and before I hook up my homemade contraption to that, what I'm going to do to test it out is hook it up to my air compressor at home, which also has a regulator on it. So what I'm going to do is turn it down to maybe about 30 psi in the hose, and then hook it up and see what happens. Let's see if I can do this with one hand. Ooh, there we go. Okay, and then now let's turn up the pressure. So far, it's just making funny air noises. I don't hear any air leaks. And I don't see any water leaks either, which is good. Right now we are at roughly about 30 psi. So let me hook up the water hose, see if it works. Turn this little valve on. So I guess that didn't go as expected. There was definitely pressure in the system and it held really great. Okay, so I found out the issue. This guy doesn't like to clip in. Normally you push it and it's supposed to lock in place, but for some reason it doesn't, so you gotta push that collar in. So now, in theory, it should work. Okay, so I filled the guy back up with water, and right now I have it set at 20 psi because 30 was just excessive. And let's give it a shot. Hasn't fallen off yet, the little coupler. That's a good sign. The water should come out right now. And there we go. So this guy will constantly spit out water, not needing to be pumped up again with the silly little hand pump. Because it's hooked up to the compressor. So the next step, what I'm going to do is actually hook it up to the ARB compressor and make sure the regulator works with that, meaning that the compressor will kick in whenever it needs to, and yada yada yada. Anyways, let's try it out. So now let's hook up the compressor and hope nothing blows up. Ready? Let's do it. It's still on. That's scary. Okay, compressor turned off. So the orange hose goes all the way to the front of the Land Cruiser where the air compressor is. Right now I have it set at 20 psi. It's locked into place. I don't hear any air leaks. There's no more water leaks. So let's give this a shot. So the water is running and we should hear the compressor kick in. There it goes. So every time the pressure drops a little bit, the compressor should kick in just to make sure the pressure is at 20 psi. And that is my water all done. So when I take this guy out for a road trip, I will fill it up all the way so I won't run into the low water issue. Also, I will definitely make sure I clip on this coupling 100% before I try to turn on the water again. Actually, let me turn it off right now and relieve all the pressure in the hose. There we go. Hook this guy. That's it for this video, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed watching me get soaked. Now, if you're planning to mod your WaterPORT just like I did, a couple of quick tips. Number one, obviously make sure your couplers are on there as tight and secure before you turn on the water, or you'll end up like me. And number two, make sure your air regulator is all the way loose when you apply the air pressure from the air hose. So what that means is make sure it starts off at 0 and you can slowly turn the regulator up to build the pressure. To be honest, I don't see a need to go over maybe 10 or 15 psi, and you'll probably save more water that way. If you have more questions about the setup, hit me up on my Instagram. I'll leave a link down below. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you go ahead and hit that like button. And for more Land Cruiser and Overland content, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.